It's hard to know how to start this, how to begin to talk about something that in one sense is so monumental, but another is like a distant whisper of something I can't quite remember. It will likely be a meandering reflective talk. I'm not sure if I'll end up where I think I will now I've begun. I thought about talking about what went wrong, but to just define it as wrong would be wrong. It went in ways I wouldn't expect, that many might regret, or roads that aren't preset out or planned. But it didn't go wrong, it went elsewhere. It went to places too bright, too loud, too much. In a way like a radio that is not quite on loud enough to comprehend what's playing, but still is much too loud. Suicide and neurodivergence is a big subject. It's an ominous subject, but it's an important subject. People often talk of the darkness, trapped in the darkness, lost in the darkness. But darkness for me has always been like a hug, an energy, something uplifting to feel comfort from. Within darkness, I feel protected. It's the light that is blinding, of too much and too bright, too white, too stark, too vast, vastness of nothingness. No man's land, I think, could be an adventure on a dark night. But in the light, when it's bright, it is thirst, it is exhaustion. It's too dry and it's too vast, and nothing is hidden in shadow. You are just lost in the depths of an internal desert. Sand in your lungs, scratchy in your skin, in your hair, your ears, your eyes, your head. I spent vast amounts of time lost in that bright, blinding desert of yellow circles. I don't know if how I think is distinctly different to other people, because I have found people don't tend to discuss the format in which they think. What I do know is that at times when communication has been vital, translating my thoughts to words and being understood has been a major challenge. Without going into detail, I experience the world through shapes and colours and sounds. In its simplest form, I see colours outside my mind, like a transparent haze in front of my eyes, and internally, floating cubes of changing colours and textures is my experience and processing of life's everydays, ups, downs, and in-betweens. Triangles are dangerous, overbearing, all-or-nothing perfection. Circles, and particularly yellow circles, are my experience of threat. Yellow circles send terror through me. Yelling yellow spinning circles. Today yellow is okay. Still not good, but not paralysing. These days, yellow is generally contained within the safety and balance of cubes. But back then, yellow was bad. Yellow was set to yellow, and couldn't be manipulated or turned into challenge. It was set at threat. I never understood why other people are so set on yellow being a happy colour. I can't really recall when it started, or the specifics of why. It's more like there was many, many little whys building up that sand timer before it exploded. But I'm going to estimate here, at about age 11, I think that's the first time I fully considered suicide. I don't imagine I knew that word though, more the idea of no longer here, a new way out, or a time to stop being in that desert. That little person that I've always known so well was under threat. I was under threat. That me I was comfortable with, I felt would soon be robbed from me. When I grow up, I want to be me. I don't want to be something else or someone else. But I was terrified that that safety was going to be stripped away, time stealing me with each year to pass, all the approaching change to come. As the years went on, I felt the mask take more and more control, trapping me inside and taking over my life. So I considered it first at 11, but didn't act on it properly till I was 14. I think the transition to secondary school and moving schools, and my few friends moving to other schools, and the boiling pot that is adolescence, mixed with the confusion, miscommunication, change, uncertainty, and knowing I was different but not knowing how, and other cruel, unnecessary things that happened. Teenage years and fears of my body changing amplified fear of losing real me, and the fast approaching change, all the change to come, and the unknown adult soon to take my place as me. It was too much. So I decided I'd rather die as real me than give in and live trapped inside while this unknown adult lived my life. So that was really the start of it all. I was admitted to Children's Psychiatric Hospital after taking an overdose on the way to school. I didn't have any idea how to communicate it in a way that made any sense to anyone else, that what was going on. I was probably baffling to the staff because I'd flicker from real me, who was a mixture of moods of agitation and low and numb and frustrated, and anger at the mask, or at fake Jess, as I used to describe it. Then I'd flick to the mask, who was really starting to develop, who presented as lovely and polite and calm and agreeable. To real me to mask, to real me to mask. I also somewhat liked it there in the hospital. There was routine, and others there like me who were different and were lost and confused too. So I was taken out of the chaos of life and into a sort of calm. Sort of. And there was a school, which will always be my favourite school. I enjoyed learning. It wasn't like the mayhem of real school. Okay, I spent a lot of time doing word searches, but the teachers there were real and they cared and were supportive, more than any doctor had been. And I think that was the start of me realising how much I really liked to learn, and that it was possible that there was a space where I could. It was awful too, though, the hospital. I didn't have the understanding back then to know it was my sensory perception, but by then I had learned the cause and the solution to one particular problem. As a child, I had a lot of so-called growing pains in my legs, and they were so bad they kept me awake at night, in tears. I took lots of baths because that's the only thing that gave relief, until I realised that it was my toenails causing all this discomfort. So I kept them really short, and any time they got even a little bit long, I'd cut them back. That kept away the aches for the most part. I remember trying to explain this at the hospital. I begged and cried for them to let me cut my nails. I couldn't sleep or be distracted from the aches. But the staff didn't understand. They wouldn't believe me when I explained it was my nails. I would bang up and down the stairs in my bare feet trying to bang away the uncomfortableness. That's always worse than pain. I pleaded for a bath. I screamed at them to let me cut my nails for 3 days, but all to no avail. They said it could be dangerous, and I said they could watch me do it, or even do it for me, and they just said I was being silly. There were other people here with real problems, and I should just go to sleep. Thinking about it now, I can feel the ache again, and since then I've always carried several nail clippers everywhere. But that experience was the start of something else, the start of something that made all my attempts to communicate even more difficult. Because from that I got a mark of trouble, or exaggerating, or looking for attention. I wouldn't be surprised if it went down as challenging behaviour. I already had barriers to communicating, and now here was a new one, added on top. As a kid, you think if you say it louder or shout, they are bound to hear you, and you have no idea that that will just make it way worse. They didn't seem to believe me about anything after that. I never got to why I was there in the first place, and I was discharged and readmitted again after another attempt, but quickly discharged again, because I was 15 and no longer considered a child, but also not considered an adult, and there was no services for us half children, half adults back then. So as a half adult, half child, I ended up in adult services, and that was horrendous. I remember being on a ward for weeks, back in the days of bed rest, where you were not allowed out of pyjamas for 2 or more weeks, and then as I wasn't even allowed by law in the hospital, I wasn't allowed off the ward. I spent weeks there, with no fresh air. Sometimes someone would come to take me to the young adult programme for an hour, but often they didn't. Those weeks were awful. I was in an all-female ward, and I found women to be the most confusing back then, especially with all their changing tones of voice and expressions. And there was no one my age. I wandered the ward, I watched others come and go. There wasn't any therapy, unless you can count the advice from my psychiatrist at the time to listen to Girlfriend in a Coma by the Smiths, and that would make everything all right. I still don't have a clue what that was about. So I sat on the windowsill in the smoking room behind the curtain, watching the garden outside. There I could listen to my music, and it was dark, and I guess like a cat liking to be in a cardboard box, I felt safe behind the curtain. But no one could find me there. They said the nurses had looked for me and I was inconsiderate. But I'd had loud music in my ears and couldn't hear anyone. That lost me my access to another room, my view of the garden and my music, which had been keeping me going. In music I could escape, but here I was trapped, so I decided to actually escape to the garden. The task actually turned out to be a great distraction. It took me out of my state of depression and gave me a mission and purpose. I felt a bit like a spy or a detective. I watched the doors and I learned the patterns of the staff. I wasn't thinking about the future or going back to no man's land. I was just thinking about getting to the garden. And I did get to the garden, but they were not happy. And once out, I wouldn't go back. Physically, though, I was brought back and told I had only made it worse and now would be there for months. I guess they reevaluated that decision though, and I was discharged the next morning. And that mission ended in another mark of trouble. I was now really on a roll. For the next few years, I wandered through life in a daze, and every birthday I would act. I was terrified this birthday would be the one I'd lose me. This literal interpretation of becoming an adult terrified me, like the idea of being abducted in your sleep at night with no chance of being found. But my attempts were kind of becoming a pattern. I wanted to find somebody that could help. I still had the belief back then that doctors knew best, and if they saw me, they could save me or tell me what was going on. It was a gamble with each attempt, as it had to be serious enough to get me to hospital, and sure, if it killed me, at least that would be that, and it would be better than losing me. My mum at this stage had lots of books about highly sensitive children or indigo children, and these books were starting to change to books about autistic children. I'd later find out that my mum tried to have me assessed for autism a few times, but it never happened. I started looking at these books too, and they made lots of sense. I got hooked on researching all I could about being autistic. I was consumed by research and finally was assessed and diagnosed as autistic and ADHD. So that was that. Finally, I had an answer. Kind of. I came away from the assessment elated, thinking everything was making sense now. I knew I was different and I knew what it was called, so now I could figure it all out. And for a while things picked up. But I went back into a world that knew nothing about autism. And yes, I had the name, but people didn't want to know I was autistic. All the barriers were still there, and no one had told me how to stop masking or take the power away from fake Jess, or even understood what I meant by fake Jess. I don't think masking was a term used a lot back then. Also, and very worryingly, most people seemed to like fake Jess better than me, because she was quiet, she was agreeable, she didn't disagree, she didn't speak up, she wasn't angry or sad or lost. So I had a name but no support, and nothing really changed. And then something else happened. But I don't think I'll go into that here, except to say it made me hate fake Jess even more, because now she got me into a situation where she let someone seriously hurt me. She was a lot more dangerous now, and now I was 18, I was going to lose myself anyway. And that pull to stop her, or end it all, became much stronger. So on my 18th birthday I tried to commit suicide again, and ended up back in hospital. That word, depression, it feels too light, too floating and incomplete for that state I was in. It doesn't punch, it doesn't plummet or burst with heavy pressure. Agitation, there was lots of that too. When trying to make sense made even less sense. When trying to communicate led to piling more on that mountain of miscommunication. But burnout as a child, lost in a confusing world, and fear of losing me led to a state of depression. My last time in hospital was short, really short, 3 days I think, in a new hospital. I had fought to follow my psychiatrist when she moved, because she had been the only doctor who ever really listened. Even if she didn't understand, or even when we disagreed, she would listen and she would let me disagree. And it was like she provided a space where we would explore the misunderstanding and uncertainty together, even if it didn't always make sense. I was furious, though, at being discharged after 3 days, as it was such a change to what I had been used to. But on reflection, it was the best thing that happened, because then I had a purpose and a focus to return to. I was so angry, though, at the time, because I was used to spending months in hospital each time. I think I definitely became addicted to hospital. Hospital was safe, but it was real too. It wasn't like the outside world. People in hospital don't say, "Hello, how are you?" and "I'm fine, thank you," when they feel everything is falling apart. They say what they mean. Hospital people are honest and raw. I could be real me in hospital more of the time than I could in the outside world. With other patients, at least. Don't get me wrong, the agitation, low, flat and numb was still there. Yellow circles still crowded my mind. The fear of losing me was there, but more as a fear of what would happen once my days ran out. I spent a lot of time afraid of what would happen when my days ran out, and I would be discharged. I could sit in chairs and do jigsaws. I did so many jigsaws in hospitals I can't bear to look at a jigsaw anymore. Day-to-day life had a solid routine, from first thing in the morning to last thing at night. I didn't have to worry about any of the executive functioning tasks I find so challenging. It was predictable. I enjoyed sitting with others and listening and laughing and joining in. I made great friends in hospital. The other people in hospital liked real me too. And if they didn't, they told me. So connection and communication with the other patients was very clear. And that was so refreshing. So I was like a zombie throughout life for so many years, not really there, unaware of the outside world. And I didn't understand the approach. I'd go into hospital, and while it was comfortable and safe and somewhat certain, it didn't make sense that there was very little help. I was there to get help. I was there to understand and start to make sense. I didn't need a rest. I didn't need a break. This was the place, and a safe place, to start the difficult work of figuring it all out. Part of me was giving up, part of me was frozen but safe-ish. But the strongest part of me wanted to figure this out. And back then I thought this was the purpose of doctors and psychiatric hospitals. But no, that wasn't available. Very little was available. If I estimate roughly this time in and out of hospital at about 10 years, then I'd say at least the first 6 of those years, the therapy in hospital was virtually non-existent. I'd be in for maybe 3 or 4 months, and I might be offered 2 or 3 talk therapy sessions in the last month of my stay, or I'd be put on a program the week before discharge. But that never really worked, because I was not the correct type of anxiety for the anxiety program, or I was too complex for CBT, or I didn't have time left for schemotherapy. In the last years of hospital, though, I did get a little bit more help, still tending to be towards the end of my stay. I remember music therapy and art therapy, where I finally felt there was a medium where I could start to understand me more, maybe if others still couldn't. I remember doing a series of artwork to try and visualize me and fake Jess. I would do what seemed really dull and flat artwork, and then shine a light behind it to show the depth of colour and texture that couldn't be seen unless you look at it with a spotlight. I remember fighting to have that I'm autistic put on my care plan, and they generally would concede, but always with the response that being autistic had nothing to do with my mental health. Which makes no sense. How could my foundational underpinnings, which influence everything I do, not have to do with my mental health? So hospital was predictable. It became my normal, a really rather unhealthy normal. I don't engage in much thought of what if this or what if that had happened, because it didn't. What happened, happened. But thinking about it now for this, I wonder if I hadn't developed that addiction to hospital, would I even be here? Because despite the lack of psychological help in the place, I did grow a lot in hospital. All that often unsuccessful trying to communicate required a lot of reflection and developing self-awareness, and without hospital as an option, I think the dangerous options that I tried too might have worked. So I'm glad in a way. But then maybe if I had known more about me and how I was different and the name for that difference, and if the world had been set up for the diversity of humans that exist, maybe I wouldn't have needed a refuge. Maybe I would have got through school. Looking back now, I think I would have loved school because I love learning, but there were too many barriers. If there had been more autistic acceptance and awareness, maybe I would have got to where I am now a lot faster. But then I don't think I could be who I am now without those experiences. And I quite like who I am. I like to think, I like to learn, I like to work, and for the most part these days I've carved out a space in the world where I can be me, where I can be real, where there is no mask trying to take me down, where I can use my experience to support others, to build that awareness and that acceptance that was not there when I was growing up. That's not to say that every day is a content day. It's not. But I don't think I'd want every day to be a content day. I love challenges. When I can figure it out and get back or get to a new space, there's a strength and growth in that process, which is always painful and hard in parts, but I wouldn't ever swap for constant happiness. Balance. I like the tilting dance of bouncing cubes of balance. That's what I live for these days. In some sense now my colours have dimmed. Sometimes they're so vague I could blink them away, like sleepy dust sparkles in the morning. But even when they're not there, bright and alive, I know they're still there, and I'm still here, and every part of me that has got me to here is still here. These days, the outside world I perceive bright or dark, but with wonder. And I can bring them back stronger and vivid. I feel the colours in the water, picking guitar strings and sometimes piano keys, or listening to raw tones of someone like Lisa O'Neill or Keela. And then, of course, the flip to that, they do stamp in times of overload, throwing their weight around, blinding and distorting and thundering around. But usually these days I know what to do. I know how to regain a sense of balance or how to take a breath. Growing up, it's funny. I used to be so terrified that all of a sudden I'd be all grown up and I'd be gone. That this adult would be here and I would be lost, and that would be it. But we don't stop growing up. Maybe we do in a literal sense, and when we are older, maybe some of us will grow down. But we don't stop growing and changing, and we don't lose ourselves. When I grow up, I want to be me. When I was younger, that seemed to be impossible. I now know I can always be me, and I'll always fight to be me.